From Cal's disappearance after going under the radar, to Captain Daly somehow not making it past the judgment, these are more questions the manifest finale didn't answer. I mean, where the heck did Cal go? In the third season of the show, there's this big focus on the tail fin of Flight 828, which mysteriously resurfaced off the coast of Cuba. The government takes charge of it and puts it in their Project Eureka lab, where they're trying to figure out what happened to the plane and why the tail fin showed up if the rest of the plane supposedly returned intact. It's a pretty intense setup, with the NSA boss Vance and the serious Dr. Gupta keeping a close eye on things. The lab's doing all sorts of experiments on the tail fin throughout the season, hoping to find some clues. But Ben and Sanvi managed to sneak into the facility to try and stop the testing. Why? Because apparently it was causing earthquakes and all kinds of other disasters, and just when things couldn't get more chaotic, they discover some driftwood that's supposedly from Noah's Ark. Of course, Cal's a key character in all of this. After some convincing from the ever-reliable Angelina, he decides to visit the Eureka facility and see the tail fin for himself. Ben and Grace show up too, desperately trying to get Cal out of there, begging Dr. Gupta to stop the testing. But then Cal touches the tail fin and vanishes into thin air. Poof! Just like that, he's gone. We don't have a clue where Cal went, and we're left wondering for the entire season finale. At the very end, Cal finally returns, but he's all aged up, like a good 5.5 years have passed for him. Coincidence? I think not. Like, it's the exact duration the plane was missing. The worst part is that this question was never answered in Season 4, and now it'll forever remain a mystery, just like the biblical plagues. The biblical connections and symbolism throughout the show were pretty cool, especially for viewers who are familiar with those stories. But I've got to admit, when it came to the plagues, things got a bit confusing. In the Bible, there's this story about God sending 10 plagues to Egypt because the Pharaoh wouldn't let the Israelite slaves go free. Or they could have just been there to add an extra layer of intensity to the storyline without a deeper meaning attached. Why did Eden stop getting callings? The final episodes confirmed that those callings and everything that followed were all pre-planned, like some grand plan set in motion. And during those 5 years that the passengers were MIA, each one of them received crucial information that would guide them on their return to the real world. But we all thought that Eden, being a close and trusted source, would play a major role in receiving new callings. Turns out that wasn't quite the case. Surprisingly, Eden didn't get as involved in the calling-receiving process as the fans expected. And from what I could gather, it seemed like she wasn't getting any more callings of her own. The question I have now is, did the divine consciousness put a halt on Eden's ability to receive new callings because she simply wasn't needed anymore? I mean, think about it. The divine had this master plan, and maybe they realized that Eden had fulfilled her purpose, or that her role had somehow shifted. Maybe the divine decided to focus on other passengers, or utilize different means to steer everyone in the right direction. Speaking of which, I've got to talk about what the passengers did in the divine consciousness. The whole concept of the divine consciousness in the show is still pretty confusing. You catch glimpses of it as this glowing white thing, but beyond that, it's a mystery, making you wonder about what actually went down in there. When? Part of me suspects that the passengers were living within this divine consciousness the whole time. It kind of makes sense when you consider that they experienced the same amount of time as the plane disappeared for. Plus, there's that crucial scene between Mick and Zeke where his memory starts fading in the glow, hinting at this deeper connection. But then again, this theory doesn't quite align with the whole repressed memories explanation, or the fact that the passengers can enter or leave the consciousness. So how the heck did this all-knowing divine consciousness actually work? And what were the passengers up to during their time there? Sadly, you might never get the answer to this question or know why Cal was chosen to tip the scales. Like, out of all the passengers on that mysterious plane, it was always Cal who had the strongest connection to those callings. He was like the chosen one, the guy who seemed to have a direct line to whatever greater power was at play. But things got even more interesting when he had that encounter with Henry Kim. After that encounter, Cal ended up with a scar that marked him as the Dragon. And thanks to some sleuthing by Olive and TJ, they discovered that this dragon status meant Cal had the power to save the world, to tip the scales, as they put it. And get this, he was touched by Sapphire, which made his role even more significant. But this also leads me to the next question. Why were the passengers from that specific flight called? During the face-off between Michaela and Ben against that creepy Grim Reaper creature, Michaela straight up asks, "Why did you choose us?" I mean, it's a fair question, right? They're just a bunch of regular people, nothing out of the ordinary. So why in the world were they picked for this crazy mission? But the spooky figure doesn't say a word in response. It just hovers there, looming over a few passengers, while Michaela and Ben go on about how they've been all dedicated to the callings and done good deeds. And you won't believe what happens next. In a bold move, they charge at the Grim Reaper, and poof, it retreats and disappears into thin air. How's that for a plot twist? But Michaela never gets an answer to her burning question. Seriously though, why did this specific group, the passengers of Flight 828, get chosen for this massive task? It can't just be a random lottery, right? There has to be more to it. Just like there has to be more to Alzura's role. Like, did he actually survive the death date? One of the craziest twists in Manifest's history started with Alzura's journal, which revealed some crazy things. Turns out this 16th century explorer and his crew vanished into thin air, just like the Flight 828 passengers did. Alzura's even caught a glimpse of Flight 828, probably because they were all hanging out in the divine consciousness, like cosmic buddies or something. Things got even more interesting toward the end of Season 2, when Manifest waved goodbye to TJ. They sent him off to Egypt, of all places, so he could dive into Alzura's journey and explore his own struggle with the death date. Now, the show did bring TJ back, and they even revisited Alzura's journal. But they never bothered to explain if TJ made it past that ominous death date, just like they never explained how the lifeboat didn't sink. That black spirit thing has already complicated the story, and now it ties into another detail from the finale that just doesn't add up. Since Season 3, the passengers have known that if even one of them messed up and failed this so-called judgment, they would all be in trouble. It's a collective punishment kind of deal. But even after the deaths of 11 passengers, the lifeboat managed to stay afloat. So, 2 passengers, Pete and Corey, almost bit the dust thanks to that creepy black spirit. But then, something crazy happened. The characters started yelling at the spirit and it just backed off. Seriously, it's hard to wrap your head around the fact that the passengers just arguing for their own case was enough to scare away this supposedly powerful spirit. Like, come on, by the show's own rules, you'd think the lifeboat would sink, right? But that's not the only thing that didn't make sense, because the fans want to know why Captain Daly didn't get to live. Daly was at the center of all the drama, and he wasn't one of the resurrected passengers. Can you believe it? Any shred of hope that his tragic death was somehow undone got completely crushed when they released a deleted scene, confirming that he suffered the same horrific fate as Angelina, Randall, Paul, and Autumn. I gotta say, it's a bit jarring, you know? Egan, the guy who pretty much looked out for himself throughout most of the show, managed to make it past judgment, but Captain Daly, who had his own share of troubles but wasn't irredeemable, wasn't deemed worthy of a second chance. I just can't wrap my mind around it. So, from Captain Daly somehow not making it past the judgment to Cal's disappearance going under the radar, these were more questions the Manifest finale didn't answer.